Okay, good evening. I hope everybody can hear me okay. If you have any comments about the audio or visual components of the class, please feel free to leave a comment. We'll try our best to accommodate and to address all the issues that we may or may not have. Okay, welcome everybody to the Parsha class. We're going to get started. This week's Torah portion is the Parsha of Terumah, which talks about the commandment from God to make a tabernacle, to make a moving temple, and eventually, obviously, in the land of Israel, became a physical structure, a building, a non-movable building. So, in this week's parsha, it's the word terumah means to donate, right? So Moses says that you shall give a collection, right? And everybody should pledge their materials and their money to the construction of the temple. Now, one of the key to our class today is going to be one of the verses in the beginning. It says, "Va'asuli mikdash, you shall make from your sanctuary, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell amongst them." So, what we see from this verse is that it doesn't say, "I will dwell in it," I will dwell in the structure. God says, "I will dwell amongst them," amongst the Jewish people. And really, this idea is that everything is the Torah, like we talked about before, is eternal, and its lessons are for all time. Even though today we don't have a tabernacle, we don't have a temple, obviously the lessons are still relevant because the God dwelling is not about a physical building. God dwells within us, right? So in the times of the desert, they had a tabernacle. In the times in the land of Israel, they had a temple. But really, it's about God dwelling within us. Okay. And that is really the crux of this, I guess, the principle that's going to the structure of today's class. So one of the things that we're going to talk about, what we're really going to talk about today, is one of the commandments in relation to the temple and the tabernacle. So for this, we got to go visit Maimonides. Maimonides and the laws of the temple, chapter 8, laws 1 through 3. He talks about the idea of there's a mitzvah to guard the temple. And it says as follows. He says that guarding the temple is a mitzvah, even though they were not worried about robbers or intruders, but it was an honor guard, because the prestige of a palace with guards is much greater than a palace without guards. So there's a mitzvah to every evening to guard the temple, right? And by the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levi and the Levites. Okay, so the verses that it says, just to in Numbers, these verses about the guarding the temple is Va'ata uvanacha itach lefnei ohel ha'edus, says you and your children shall be with you in front of the tabernacle. And again later it says V'shamrus mishmeres hakodesh, and they shall guard the sanctuary. So this is a mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah tells us that it's a mitzvah to guard, an honor guard, again, not a security guard, but honor guard in front of the temple. So the question is, why do they have to be Kohanim and Leviim, right? If it's an honor guard, right? So look, we know that a Kohen, the priests, right, descendants of Aaron, or a Levite, which are descendants of the whole tribe of Levi, had different responsibilities in the tabernacle and the temple. Okay, we'll just use the word temple for now, just so we don't get confused. So, for example, only a Kohen could bring the offering on the mizbeach, on the altar. Only a Kohen could go into the inner part of the temple, where there was the menorah, to light the menorah. Only they could go to the table where their showbreads were kept, and only a Kohen Gadol could go into the place where into the Holy of Holies, right? So everybody had their spots. The Levites had a special spot where they would play instruments and sing. So everyone had their spot. So if we're saying that it's just an honor guard, right? It's not a service in the temple, but it's a mitzvah to guard the temple. Why can't you use regular people? Why do you have to have people who have very, very holy jobs, right? And they're busy, right? It's a full-time job, full-time gig, while it's their shift right? The Kohanim had shifts. Every family would come at different times. So why couldn't anybody come? Why couldn't anybody come? Okay. But the reason is because this is an honor guard, right? And when you have an honor guard, you want to have the most distinguished people, right? It's honorable for a distinguished person to be guarded, not by regular people, but by important people. Just as an aside, we're coming up to Purim in 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks, right? In the story of Purim, right, King Ahasuerus asks Haman to lead Mordechai throughout the city, right? As an honor to Mordechai, he says it has to be a special person. So we see even this idea by a mortal king, that he understood that it's not good enough to have a regular soldier, right? But it had to be one of the ministers of the king, right? So Haman was a great minister of the king, and he was going to lead the procession, right? So this is a similar idea that even though the Kohanim and Leviim are full-time busy people with the holy things and karbanos of the offerings and the incense and the showbreads and all the things they had to do, right, serving God in the temple, they also had to be involved in the guarding of the temple. Okay. So now let's go into this idea of, did they have any special uniform? Yes, the Kohanim had special uniforms, but that uniform they only wore in the temple for the service. Outside the temple, they did not wear their uniforms. I'm not mistaken, so I don't think they wore. I think they wore just a regular cloak. They did not have uniforms like the Queen of England had. I don't think they wore their. But I will get back to you on that for sure. But I don't think they wore their Kohen garments. They wore regular garments. Okay, but they were on the Temple Mount. So the question is, what does that apply today, right? So our sages tell us that even that holiness does not disappear. Okay, holiness does not disappear. So the place where the temple was today is just as holy as it was back then. So seemingly, since the holiness of the temple never disappeared, right, and it's still in its full force, right, and we'll get into that about what is the we'll talk a little bit maybe about what is the holiness of the Temple Mount. So if you're saying it's not a security issue, it's an honor, so maybe it'll apply today. So what we see here is that so maybe apply today. So like I mentioned, so there is holiness to the Temple Mount. So for example, on the Temple Mount today, you are not allowed to go if you're in a state of impurity, of ritual impurity. So you have to be ritually pure, which today is not possible because we don't have the red heifer, right? The para aduma and the sprinkling and all the special things. So seemingly we're not. Therefore, many Jewish people are careful about not going on the Temple Mount, and definitely not past certain places, and we don't really know exactly where those places are, so we avoid pretty much the whole Temple Mount, which be anywhere past the Western Wall, right? The Western Wall, that wall is not, that wall is a retaining wall for the Temple Mount. Anything on the other side of that, again, I'm not an expert exactly where the holiness of the Temple Mount starts, so that even applies today. So seemingly, if it's an honor guard, maybe it would apply. And in fact, it was a rabbi. And this actually, I never knew about this, so you want to know something new that I learned preparing this class. There was a rabbi who authored a book called the Mishkanos La'avri Yaakov, and his name was Rabbi Hillel Moshe Meshel Gelbstein. He arrived in Jerusalem in 1869, and I'm sorry, I don't know if he arrived in 1869. Maybe it was around then. He arrived around then. He was a Hasidic rabbi. He was a Chassid of the Kutsk Hasidic dynasty in Poland. He eventually became. He was also involved. Was a student of the Ger Rebbe, who was a student of the Kutsk Rebbe. He also traveled to Lubavitch, to the third Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the third Lubavitch Rebbe. And eventually, after the third Lubavitch Rebbe passed away, he emigrated to Israel. He arrived to Jerusalem, and he felt, he wrote about, and he felt that there was a mitzvah to have this honor guard. And it applied today because, like we mentioned, the holiness of the Temple Mount still stands. And he actually petitioned Moses Montefiore to purchase buildings near the Temple Mount so they could have an honor guard at over there. And he talks about, I'll just read a little bit of his writing. He wrote, God has granted me the opportunity to rectify a great issue, to repair a breach. There is a mitzvah in the Torah to have guards around the temple. And he said, with God's help, I've concluded this mitzvah is applicable even nowadays, and etc., etc. He tried to, he also wanted to buy, he wanted to buy places where they would have different synagogues. They wanted to have Ashkenazi synagogue, a Sephardic synagogue, a Nusach Ari synagogue. Anyways, he ended up raising 270 gold Napoleon coins from a donor named Rabbi Mendel Rand, even though the Jerusalem rabbis did not support his position. And Baron Rothschild got involved with trying to purchase these properties. Eventually, they felt that it was going to incite the local Arabs, and it was unsuccessful. But the point is, whether or not, we see practically, though, that this was not something that most rabbis pursued, okay? We see that in the times of the Talmud, right, which was immediately following the destruction, we never saw this idea of trying to do it. We see even more recently, right, where Jewish people have been settling the land, and they weren't, maybe you could say in the times of the Talmud, they were still under Roman rule, and especially now where we're, not just that we're coming close to the Messianic era, not only is it an idea of the past holiness, but the coming holiness. But in the end of the day, it seems that it really was never practical for the Jewish people. And like we said, Rabbi Gelfstein, even though he felt that it does apply nowadays, he felt that it seems that the overwhelming majority of rabbis understood that the incitement that would be caused by such a thing was not worth it, right? So we know that the Torah tells us that we have to live with mitzvahs. We're not supposed to die by mitzvahs. So except the 3 cardinal sins, in general, we don't sacrifice our lives for a specific mitzvah, so this would fall into that idea. So it seems that it never really was, it has never been, and it still probably isn't today, a practical idea to have an honor guard on the Temple Mount. Now, you want to say from here to tomorrow, right, whether or not we went into we got a little bit in the weeds of whether or not it applies in a physical sense, but we mentioned earlier, the Torah tells us that God will dwell within amongst us, right? It's not about the physical building necessarily. The physical building is so God can connect to us. So when it comes to the idea of guarding the temple, there must be something that it's a practical way that we could bring this into our lives, into our daily lives, irrelevant of the Temple Mount and its status. So how do we guard the temple? What does that mean? So the Torah tells us that, and it's brought down in the Talmud about the idea that we have to make our homes, we have to make our synagogues and our homes into a mikdash ma'at, a small replica, almost, if you want to say, temple. In other words, like we said, we want to have a temple in our own lives, so we bring into our own home, we bring holy books, obviously in a synagogue, we have a Sefer Torah, but even in your own home, you could have Jewish books, and you have Jewish items, and you have places, right? It says that every time we have a table and we eat bread, it's like the altar, right? So all these things that we have in our lives, everything in our lives revolves around Judaism, should revolve around Judaism as much as it could. And these things in our life, it's important that we make it a priority. And so, for example, you can have sometimes, right, somebody will go to a store and they'll be buying, let's say, kosher wine for Shabbat Kiddush. And they say, well, this wine is, this is the best wine, and this is, cheaper wine, right? Or this wine is is one kosher certification, but this one has the best kosher certification. They make sure they're watching it from the beginning to the end, whatever the specifics may be, right? And once, we'll say, well, I don't want to spend so much money, or it's not so important, I don't really care. That is showing a lack of guarding our mitzvot, right? It's showing a lack of enthusiasm, right? If somebody goes into an Apple store, not an Apple store like the things that you eat, but like where they sell iPhones, right? Nobody goes into an Apple store, and the Apple, I think the people who work there called an Apple genius, and the guy says, well, it's $900 for an iPhone. Nobody says, oh, well, I don't know. This is really that worth it, right? Like, no, I want the best thing. This is important for me. I want to have the best quality phone, and they buy the thing, right? That's important to you. So, and this sends also a message to your children, to your home, and to your friends and your family about what's important. Are your books displayed, right, in your home? Do you guard your books? Do you put them in a beautiful case out in the open, or are they in the basement hiding somewhere? Do you buy the best things for Jewish things, or do you spend more time considering what kind of phone you're going to have, what kind of clothes you're going to wear? Again, not to say any of those things are specifically bad, but the idea that we have to put prominence, right, into our Judaism, and that's how we guard, right? We on the outside of the temple, meaning not just that so we're doing all the things, and we're coming to synagogue, and we're doing Shabbat, and we're putting on tefillin every day, all the things that we have to do, but do we put prominence into it? Do we make it a priority? And that's really what the honor guard is about in our practical daily lives. So every single one of us, we have to find the things in our lives that maybe are we proud to be Jewish? Are we proud to be Jewish in our homes? Do we make it a priority? Or is it something that we just have to do, so we do it anyways, right? That's what this is really all about. So we have to, in this week's Torah portion, it starts off that we should give a terumah, right? We should give a donation from our heart, right, towards the temple. We have to find the things in our heart, right, from the goodness of our heart, the things that matter to us, right, the things that maybe make us a little bit uncomfortable, right, and donate. That's what we're donating to God, right? We're saying, you know what, maybe I would rather have a big television in my home, and that be the centerpiece of my home. Or you can say, maybe the centerpiece of my home will be my Jewish books. Maybe the centerpiece in my home will be my Shabbat table, right? We got to find the things in our lives that we can make, the Jewish things that we can make the prominent and the priority that they should be. Have a good Shabbos, have a great evening, and I will see you next week.